Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tessa Joles. I'm president of the Center for Media Literacy, and we're delighted that you've joined us today for the fifth of a six-part webinar series. Today, we're going to be addressing education systems in media literacy and how that will be building the foundational skills for democracies today and in the future. This series is sponsored through NATO and also through the Center for Media Literacy. And I'm delighted to welcome some really outstanding speakers today. And we're looking forward to asking questions of them later and interacting here so that we can get a good in-depth look at their perspectives on this important issue. Now, today we have Max Arhippainen, and Max is Chief of the Technology and Science Development Branch at the NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence in Riga, Latvia. He's been there since March 2022, but before his appointment, he was Chief of Public Affairs of the Finnish Defense Forces from 2018 and Director of Communications at the Ministry of Defense of Finland from 2013 to 2018. He has extensive earlier professional experience in journalism, economics, communication, and government. So we welcome you, Max. Thank you so much for joining us. We also have Pierre Fastrez, who is a senior research associate of the Belgian National Fund for Scientific Research and a professor in information and communication at the Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium. His main research interests are media literacy. Please, if someone has their mute off, please put it on. Thank you. So Pierre is researching media literacy competencies, definitions, and media literacy assessment. He directs the research journal. Oh dear, Pierre, you'll have to pronounce this. I admit my tin ear here. And he is a member of the Higher Council for Media Education in French-speaking Belgium. Professor Julian McDougall researches and writes about media literacy and education. He runs a doctoral program at Bournemouth University, leads the Center for Excellence in Media Practice, and convenes the Global Media Education Summit. He is co-editor of the Journal of Media Literacy Education and Routledge Research in Media Literacy and Education. And he is editor of and author of a wide range of publications. He is principal fellow of Advanced HE, a member of the Media and Information Literacy Alliance Board and the OVCOM Media Literacy Research Working Group. So I am very eager to hear from these gentlemen, and Max, definitely we will start with you and we'll get started.
Okay, thank you, Tessa, for the invitation to this important discussion. I want to make three things clear before I turn to the subject. First, the NATO Centers of Excellence are not part of a NATO command chain, but are independent units who serve as a combination of research institute, education provider, and think tank supported by Alliance, its members and partners in different fields. So I can just not talk on behalf of a NATO command structure, but only as a representative of a NATO communication society. Second, I'm not a media literacy scholar like as the other participants, but I'm a practitioner who drew on my experience as a crisis communicator and earlier professional experience as a long-time senior journalist. And the first and most important thing I want to make clear is that media literacy, in my opinion, is a much broader concept than only something that supports resilience in a nation or a target group. As I understand media literacy, it's the ability of an individual person, a group collectively, or the population of a nation as whole to assess messages in media, to analyze these messages and draw conclusions about their relevance and accuracy, and finally reflect and take action on this basis. All these media literacy abilities strengthen the general media skills and ability to search, find, and navigate in the almost infinite supply of information that is of different quality that is available today. Media literacy is a keystone in the general critical thinking and understanding the truthfulness, reliability, and value of different messages and content. High media literacy also strengthens creativity, civic engagement, and participation. And the ability to compare and evaluate content and messages from different cultures also supports intercultural dialogue and thus counteracts radicalization and violent extremism. All these very important motives, very important motives for aiming at strengthening media literacy of individuals, collective groups, and whole population. And I could also evaluate them by length. But this webinar focuses on media literacy and resilience, and I'm asked to give a NATO view on this. And yes, when it comes to military alliances, its members and its partners, when we look at media literacy from our own point of view, it is indeed mainly through the lenses of resilience we do it. The NATO heads of state and government last year declared that the resilience, both national and collective, is the basis for credible deterrence and defense. And here we're talking about the society's ability to resist and recover from major shocks and attacks. The threats and challenges to the resilience of the alliance, its members and partners, come both from state and non-state actors. They take different forms and involve the use of a variety of tactics and tools, not only conventional, non-conventional, and hybrid threats and activities, terrorist attacks, and malicious cyber activities. One threat to resilience that has been growing in importance in the recent decades is increasingly perceived the hostile information activities, including disinformation aimed at establishing our societies and undermining our shared values, and attempts to interfere with our democratic processes and good governance. And it is exactly in this field where media literacy is crucial. It's a crucial part of countering these threats. Our Center of Excellence for Strategic Communications recently developed what we call a framework to evaluate NATO allies' resilience to disinformation. It identifies central elements of building up resilience: credible government communication, fact-checking and debunking, quality journalism, democratic institutions, investment in education and skills, audience research, and robust deterrence activities. And finally, as a key element of a commitment to public engagement of a society is the media environment and the media literacy of the population.
Grazie.
Media literacy is one of the key indicators listed in the framework for building resilience to disinformation. In fact, this is one of a long-term investment directed towards all levels of society and conducted over many years. Media literacy initiatives should develop societal resilience to identify and counter different disinformation threats. In addition, it should be directed towards all levels of society. In its essence, media literacy is about the degree of knowledge and general skills which are linked to critical thinking that improves an individual's ability to analyze content and sources of information access. Being a native of Finland, I cannot resist the temptation to conclude with a few thoughts about our national experiences. Finland usually tends to top most rankings and indexes of media literacy in the world. This has recently also been noted by major international medias, such as CNN, who ran the story titled "Finland is winning the war on fake news," what's learned may be crucial for the Western democracy. And media literacy is a crucial tool in this work that CNN and other media have been trying to describe about Finland. Reading this is, of course, naturally very flattering, but at the same time, no country is as perfect as it looks, and this goes for Finland too. We also face the exactly same challenges as any other country of a more and more fragmented informational environment and the vulnerability to hostile influencing from both domestic and foreign sources, which this brings with it. But some features in our society and some things we may have helped us. One is that media education involves everyone and has been in the school curriculum for decades. But it does not only reach out to school kids, even if we tend to agree in the saying that the most important information warrior is the kindergarten teacher. This broad approach makes it possible, quoting our President Sauli Niinistö, that everyone should be an information warrior. Not only when it comes to media literacy, but the resilience and security in general, Finland takes a whole of society and long-term perspective. This requires a large amount of trust, both between citizens and subgroups in the society, in the society, but also trust in authorities and decision makers in general. However, these crucial elements of long-term commitment, whole of society approach, and need of mutual trust within the society makes the Finnish model difficult to copy, at least in the short run and perhaps also in the mid-long run. On the individual level, media literacy is a property that develops over the whole life cycle. If it's not there in a middle-aged, less educated person, it's difficult to plant there in a later stage. And it's also more difficult to take a whole of country approach in countries with higher practical and mental fences between different authorities. And finally, if the trust between different groups and the trust in the leaders of a country is not there, it's also difficult to build up very fast. And this is one reason why I am quite concerned about the development we have been seeing in the United States during the last decades, where the population seems to be more and more divided in subgroups who do not share or even want to share some common basic understanding of the truth, and lack all trust in each other and lack trust in the leaders coming from other groups. It's not my role as a foreigner to draw any political conclusions about this or try to evaluate if this makes the country a better or worse country. But one thing I can assure you, that this feature of polarization makes the American society much less resilient towards hostile information operation by both domestic and foreign actors. And with a weaker America, the world is also weaker. I conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Thank you. All right, let's move to Pierre. And Pierre, please do correct my horrible pronunciation or lack thereof, and we'll look forward to hearing from you here.
Okay, thank you, Tessa. And there's really nothing to correct. Okay, I'm assuming you can all see my screen and I only have 2 slides. So I want to start by thanking you, Tessa, for inviting me to be part of this series of great webinars. I feel really honored to be able to contribute to the conversation. So first, let me consider that the framing question for this webinar, how can media literacy support the fostering of resiliency for all citizens, is a daunting one. With 10 minutes available, one can only scratch the surface of how to answer it. And so I feel condemned to gloss over this issue, and I am also not immune to the risk of repeating very general arguments regarding media literacy, arguments that have been presented and discussed in countless seminars, webinars, conferences, panel discussions before this one. So I apologize for this. Still, I think those arguments, or at least some of them, even if they are not new, are worth considering in the context of our discussion. So I would like to start with a partial rebuttal of the premise of this webinar, the idea that citizens must be the first line of defense in our media and information ecosystem. They probably are today, and the attention dedicated to developing media literacy must be appreciated in that context, but it must be considered as complementary to media regulation, which must not be forgotten. In the context of widespread mis or disinformation, platforms and content producers, be they governments, organizations, or individuals, must be held accountable for the quality of information or media they produce. And we need to avoid a situation where all responsibility for a healthy media ecosystem and a resilient society rests solely on the shoulders of citizens who consume that information. So when I say that, I may seem to endorse a view where media literate citizens are only on the receiving end of media, and media literacy would support them in maintaining a critical view of the information they receive, information produced by forms of agency beyond their control. This view is, of course, outdated, as media users are now in a capacity to produce and disseminate information daily with the help of common digital technology. This fact justifies the idea that media literacy is not only about developing a critical outlook on media and information one encounters and consumes as a receiver, but also about being critical and responsible in the way one produces and disseminates media and information. This notion of media literacy as a form of shared social responsibility in creating media is a first opportunity for me to hint at the idea that building resiliency into the fabric of our societies may be best achieved through building common ground, not through resistance and adaptation to various types of external attacks. I will come back to this idea in a minute. What I would like to consider next is, if my slides can move forward, yes, is a series of 4 issues that, in my opinion, represent high stakes for media literacy education in relation to resiliency. The first of these issues has to do with reconciling the protectionist approach to media literacy with its empowerment-based approach. Framing media literacy as a matter of resiliency and defense forces us to consider the obvious implicit of this idea, a protectionist view of media literacy in which the knowledge, skills, and competencies associated with it support citizens in protecting themselves against the harms they are exposed to when they use media. The protectionist views of media literacy stems from an us versus them worldview, where societal resiliency is considered as a remedy to external threats. This is unavoidable for a defense organization such as NATO, and I will not try to deny the fact that there are threats to democratic societies that need to be addressed by protective mechanisms. Yet, this us versus them worldview is also the same that underpins the polarization of the political sphere in so many areas of the world today, as Max reminded us a few minutes ago. By contrast, an empowerment-based view of media literacy emphasizes how media users can creatively engage with media and technology. In this view, media literacy combines processes of reflective analysis and evaluation with contributory and collaborative practices that support personal expression and investment in participatory cultures. Media literacy is then considered as supporting civic engagement and contributing to correcting the power imbalances concerning the representation of collective identities in the media. The question of how to reconcile the protectionist and the empowerment views of media literacy brings me to the second issue I want to raise. This issue has to do with keeping the focus on the big picture of media literacy and avoiding more reductive views of what media literacy is or should be. Over the last 50 years, media literacy has attracted the attention of policymakers and more widely of public opinion as a means to solve a host of societal problems and to address a variety of moral panics. The list is long. It includes media literacy as a means to end fake news and disinformation, to counter conspiracy theories, to fight radicalization, to reduce cyberbullying, to help cope with information overload, to thwart the action of online sexual predators, to protect against the harms of televised violence and pornography, or to prevent the passivity of children in front of their screens and the developmental threats it represents. Each time a new threat appears, the media literacy movement is pressed to adjust, and the conversation about what media literacy is and what goals media education should pursue changes focus. Each of these problems is, of course, an opportunity to remind people that media literacy is essential, but it is also the greatest threat to the coherence of the media literacy education movement. Staying the course and avoiding the strategy of the moving target is not an easy thing to achieve, and yet it is essential to a deep integration of media literacy into educational systems. The succession of problematic issues to respond to also creates opportunities for researchers and educators with a variety of disciplinary backgrounds and expertise to contribute to media literacy education. This is a good thing, as long as the coexistence of these communities of expertise do not turn into a competition for attention in a context where funding resources are scarce. Once again, keeping the focus on the big picture, not on the latest symptom, should help make these communities converge around common goals instead of entering a competition. One example of keeping the focus on the big picture is how information and disinformation can be treated under the lens of media literacy. A narrow view of media literacy would justify the idea that students should specifically be taught how to distinguish falsehoods from truths in the media. A broader view, which does not deny the existence of intentional disinformation, stems from the foundational notion that all media provide representations of reality and that none of them are the objective reflection of a reality that would exist outside of them. That media participate in the way we construct our understanding of reality, and that this understanding is an integral part of reality. That all media are produced, disseminated, received, and appropriated in connection to a variety of purposes and intentions. That all media make use of semiotic systems, languages, representational formats to achieve these purposes, and that all media are subject to a multiplicity of interpretations by a variety of audiences and communities. Being able to question media and information literacy through such a critical lens, rooted in a deep understanding of the concepts of authorship, purpose, representation, languages, audiences, should support both the identification of nefarious purposes behind media messages and technology, be they political or commercial, and the broader type of creative, critical, and participative engagement with media that the empowerment tradition of media literacy advocates for. From this standpoint, resiliency could be achieved not only through the ability to protect oneself, but through the collective ability to establish common ground and to support cultural participation of all citizens from all sections of society. In this view, media literacy can be also a driving force towards intercultural dialogue. This entails making room for the idea of media literacies in the plural. That is, acknowledging that media literacy may mean different things to different communities or in different parts of the world. A third issue pertains to the scale and depth of the integration of media literacy into educational systems, and whether one considers this integration as a matter of lifelong learning or as a matter of short-term projects. You will easily guess that I am an advocate of the former. In a nutshell, integrating media literacy education into schools should not consist in workshops giving tips and tricks to students to spot disinformation. It should be an ambitious educational program weaved into the very fabric of the school system. If literacy is, and I quote René Hobbes here, the ability to share meaning through symbol systems in order to fully participate in society, end of quote, and media literacy is an extension of literacy to any symbol system and not just text, then there isn't anything more fundamental to education than media literacy. The late Geneviève Jacquinot, a French professor of education and communication, used to long for a fantasized future when media education would become useless because the school system would have been rebuilt from the ground up with media literacy as its foundational mission, instead of media education being a patchwork of micro projects piggybacking the school system. This is the kind of ambition we need for media literacy. Tessa, your own report to NATO starts with the idea that, and I quote you, media literacy processes, the abilities to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and participate through media apply to all content, anytime, anywhere, end of quote. This is exactly why media literacy should be taught at all educational levels through all disciplinary subjects. Lastly, the last issue I want to touch upon is the integration of media literacy in educational systems in connection to the risk of confusing media literacy education with the instructional use of technology. In brief, teaching with media and technology does not mean teaching about media and technology. Pushing an ambitious agenda of integrating digital media and technology into schools as pedagogical tools is necessary, but it will not automatically translate into widespread media literacy education, where media are studied as a subject in itself. In some respects, these two projects may even conflict. Indeed, a critical appraisal of digital media and technology by teachers and students may run against the commercial strategies that animate the producers of EdTech seeking to sell their products and services to schools. EdTech is, after all, also a lucrative business. By contrast, media literacy education should seek to empower its beneficiaries and support them in becoming autonomous thinkers, not just technology consumers. In that context, and that will be my last point, one of the key challenges seems to initiate a virtuous circle between mandatory education and teacher education. Training teachers to use digital media and technology in the classroom is not enough to support them in teaching about the media, and media literacy education in the classroom can only happen with qualified teachers. Integrating media literacy education into teacher education, both in initial training and continuing education, is a key factor in deploying media literacy education in mandatory education, which itself is a key motivation for training teachers properly, hence the virtuous cycle. So I started by saying that I would only gloss over the issue under discussion and repeat stale arguments. By that standard, I think I have fulfilled the contract. So I thank you for your attention, and I turn the floor over back to you, Tessa.
All right. Thank you so much, Pierre. That was a really wonderful overview, and certainly combined with Max's insights, it was informative to really see where there's overlap and some common themes emerging. So with that in mind, let's hear from Julian McDougall, and Julian will share his thoughts about the different issues and add to those, and also make some recommendations for us.
Thank you, Tessa and Max and Pierre. So firstly, by way of a response to those two fascinating contributions, Max talked about resilience in the form of critical awareness and taking action. I think that's really important, that agentive dynamic interplay between critical awareness and resilience. And then what do you do with that? How do you then become a media literate citizen? What are the uses of your media literacy? So through that lens of resilience, I was really pleased to hear that resilience is an active agentive citizenship action, as opposed to simply a kind of critical defense for oneself. And he talked about this as being essential in the hostile information environment in which we are living. So that sense in which media literacy is of the moment, because the information and media environment is so hostile and so challenging, of course, we would all agree with. That's why we're here. But I think it's very important to also be mindful about the limits of media literacy in terms of what can actually be achieved in schools, in education, when, of course, the external power structure and the rapid forces of global capitalism and all the rest of it are also in play. And that then links very nicely to Pierre's talk. And I think that interplay or site of tension between or across education and regulation is very, very important. And also, of course, the danger of seeing media literacy as simply a kind of neoliberal citizen responsibility that, rather than focus on why the information environment is so hostile and why there is so much online harm to be protected against, we simply make ourselves more resilient, right? And allow the external problems to continue. So that idea that Max articulated about taking action, and the way in which Pierre framed this very much in terms of protection and empowerment, with media literacy as a foundation for a kind of way of being with others in the offline and online world, actually, I think is really important. And I was very, very pleased to hear those related themes coming out of those two talks. So I would like to extend this as Tessa was inviting me to by giving you a tale of three texts. And the first one is in Hunslet, near Leeds, Yorkshire, UK, 1957, where Richard Hoggart writes The Uses of Literacy. And this book by Richard Hoggart, The Uses of Literacy, is partly a reflective account of his own identity, class and education, but also an analysis of the two sides of literacy. So 65 years ago, Hoggart's observing how people were using their new mass literacy at the time for self-improvement, education, social mobility, and civic engagement. All good things. But he also saw how outside forces were exploiting those new possibilities to use this same expansion in literacy through the new mass media for commercial and political motivations. So as we become more literate in whatever way that is, in this case, media literate, we can use our media literacies for ourselves and for one another in good, positive ways, but our literacies will be used on us by others with different imperatives and motivations, of course. Move now to Paris 2014 and Riga, Latvia 2016, where UNESCO adopted a declaration on media and information literacy as a human right, drafted and amended at these two events over 2 years, stating media literacy is now indispensable to a critical process that empowers and engages people as global citizens, and that it must be at the heart of strategies for the creation of a culture of communications, open, inclusive, and based on respect for human rights and democracy. So in the same way as Hoggart was writing about the positive expansion of literacy, so are UNESCO. But UNESCO in this case are, I think, at risk of seeing media and information literacy in itself as the answer, in itself as the solution, or in itself as the, to use our terminology from today, kind of resilience driver. Third text, 2022, Brussels. NATO published a defence strategy for building resiliency with media literacy, authored, of course, by Tessa Jols. And I quote, media literacy is a way to help ensure resiliency and problem-solving skills, providing people with the agency they need as active participants in the online and offline worlds. And what Tessa and NATO, by publishing this, do then is shift us towards this agentive, active, participative space and frame this around resiliency as a first line of defence. So articulated in this way, Tessa and NATO situate media literacy as an aspect of citizen self-safeguarding, and the attack-defence dynamic here is about digital information, but also the idea that media literacy is part of resilience, which cannot only be a matter of citizens' own defences, as people need to not only be able to defend themselves, but also to play an active role in making the ecosystem healthier in the future, so there is simply less danger to be resilient too. However, the situation is also, as we all know, far more complex than any kind of quick solutionism can resolve, or binary discourses about rights, resilience, and literacies can account for. It's complex because online harms and information disorder are features of unhealthy media and digital ecosystems. And why are they unhealthy? Because, as Richard Hoggart told us in 1957, literacy is always two-sided. On the one hand, citizens on the privileged side of digital inequalities are connected. We have access to all the information in the world on a device that fits in one hand. We are engaged in digital and multimodal reading. We are curating our textualized life experiences through digital platforms, and we're often very creative in the digital environment. This is all good. We have a plethora of new educational opportunities and opportunities for social mobility through the new digital literacies and media literacies that we can often develop from ourselves, either aside from the formal education system or in third spaces between our digitally mediated life worlds and educational curricula. But on the other side, we have also become a market, an audience, and a target for commercial, persuasive, manipulative, and predatory, abusive, exploitative digital interactions, media interactions, and actors with bad intentions have either willingly polluted our media ecosystems or failed to protect us in our digital environments. Media literacy then for all of us is double-edged. As Richard Hoggart saw in 1957, and we can see today, we can use our media literacies to develop our capabilities and to participate in the social, economic, and civic world, but our media literacies will also be used by others, sometimes for good, but often for harm. So the problem, to put it simply, is that many people do have media literacy, but unfortunately they use it for bad things. So we're still talking about the use of literacy. We're going back to Hunslet near Leeds, UK, 1957. We're going back to Richard Hoggart. So what do we do next? I think what draws all of the strands of our conversation today going forward is that we need theory of change for what the uses of media literacy are. So it's no overstatement to say that along with the heat of the planet and the survival of democracy, we also have the future direction of the media and digital ecosystem in our hands. Therefore, small-scale reactive media literacy interventions which focus primarily on skills and safety are no doubt important and valuable. They work well for giving a fish, whereas critical rights-based media literacy education, the kind that Pierre has talked about, is more about teaching to fish for the long term. For this, we need a theory of change. So in the research centre I work in, and in the projects that I've been working on in recent years, and in fact, for what the work we're about to do for the UK government DCMS, which is why I'm here today in this rarefied environment, we've developed a theory of change which has 4 elements, and I'll conclude by explaining what those 4 elements are. Media literate people have full and safe access to digital technology and media, appropriate for their age group, and the ability to make good choices about access. Of course, don't forget, we make choices about our media and information access for ourselves, and we deliberately narrow those choices down into silos, into preferences. So access is about much more than having broadband, much more about, and not only having informed educational use of the online world, but also the ability to expand your own access for reasons of pluralism and more diverse representation. Secondly, critical awareness. I don't think anyone in this call needs me to tell them why media literacy develops critical awareness. We've talked about it a lot already today. But that then develops into capability. And here we're using capability in the way that Sen did, to talk about a human being's ability to use resources for functionings to develop capabilities in the civic and social world. So this is what both of our previous speakers have talked about, that agentive, active use of media literacy to be a more capable citizen. And it's also all the way through Tessa's report for NATO as well. Again, so far, so good. These aren't linear, they interrelate. But the 4th one, consequences, is the one we most often miss in our media literacy research and in our media literacy projects. Why would we assume that having access, awareness, and capability will necessarily make us want to make the world a better place through our media literacy? The evidence, I'm afraid, and the reason why we're here today in this meeting, is overwhelmingly to the contrary. Therefore, the critical understanding of the consequences of actions in the media ecosystem and how to use our media literacy capabilities for positive consequences by acting as a positive influencer or a media literacy change agent, the conversion of media literacy into capability, into positive consequences. This is our project for media literacy, for resilience, democracy, and social justice. Thank you.
So much food for thought, and thank you so much, Julian. Really wonderful summary here, and also some really important points to consider in going forward. I think your comments about theory of change are particularly relevant because so often we do neglect thinking about how change management is just as important part of media literacy as the discipline itself. So thank you very much. And also I might add that Julian is presenting to us today from a very special place. Julian, would you mind sharing where that is and where you are?
Yeah, so this is not a usual day for me, before anyone gets the wrong impression, but we have this new project with the Department for Culture, Media, Sport in the UK government. And this building is the UK government base where the Treasury is. So the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, I believe, is somewhere in the building down the corridor. So you can't go to the toilet without an escort. There's a security guard outside this room, and they've kindly let me have this room for an extra hour and a half after the meeting finished, with all kinds of security protocols. And outside the window is the Houses of Parliament, and there's a balcony here, which I was casually informed is where Winston Churchill declared the end of the war. So this is not where I am normally working, but it's worthy of mention on this one and only day I'll ever be here. But I'm planning to kind of hide away and stay as long as I can.
And definitely appropriate to our discussion, because we're certainly looking at elements of democracy, of representation, of all of the pillars that we all live with every day and certainly want to see advance. So thank you.
Yeah, but I would say very briefly and quietly that there is a rather large elephant in the room here with regards to those things.
I can imagine, yes. I wonder who that might be. Oh, well, let's open the floor here and delve in, because we certainly, I think, have some really solid frameworks to look at in terms of, seeing how media literacy applies to resilience, certainly how media literacy itself has tensions and issues that that need to be addressed and that seem to lend themselves in one way or another to a more democratic process. And then certainly to look at some actions that can be taken or ways that we can ensure that positive outcomes are encouraged. Media literacy isn't about telling people what to think or what to believe, but at the same time, we do have a responsibility through our education systems, through all of our institutions, to really help people understand the foundations of democracy and why our system of governance is really one that we value and that we want to protect. So, so with that in mind, Max, when you mentioned that you see media literacy as beyond the whole construct of disinformation and misinformation, how do you see media literacy as part of the cultural fabric? What would you like to see from citizens who hopefully are media literate? What do you think they may be able to contribute?
That's a very broad question that can't really be answered as a whole, but I believe a very important element is what I talked about, the mutual trust between different groups in a society. But you may, of course, disagree with our groups, but still be ready to absorb and note what our opinions are, because in that way you can have different perceptions of the world around you at the same time that you perhaps disagree on how to draw action. And I think that this is a central element of media literacy, that you also are ready to listen to other opinions than your own, and on a intellectual way, perhaps, if you disagree on them, but not close your eyes totally. And this is one of the things that I said I was concerned about development in the United States, and unfortunately, the same feature is also being seen more and more in European countries. But if you lock yourself into your own bubble, only listening what you want to hear, that makes a society weaker as a whole.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And please, people in the audience, if you would like to ask some questions, please put them in the chat box. We're more than happy to address them and deepen our discussion. So, yes, definitely, Max, I think that, looking at trust also, is a really important factor. And this polarization certainly seems to be causing a real dissolving of trust amongst institutions. Pierre, thinking about education and the importance of media literacy to the education system, what is your perception about kind of the current state of media literacy in education systems? And of course, there's a broad challenge with media literacy education to reach adults, to reach seniors, to reach all kinds of different audiences. But the education system, as you mentioned, seems to have a special responsibility on incorporating media literacy.
Yes, definitely. So I think I would look at it in two different ways. The first one is indeed a matter of responsibility, and I really like how the view that Julian put forward, including this extra layer of envisioning consequences of media literacy into a theory of change, ties into what Max said about mutual trust. To me, this is really a matter of maybe shifting towards a more collectivist view of media literacy instead of an individualistic view of media literacy, and this may be the way to escape this kind of neoliberal view that each and every person must be responsible for the development of their own media literacy skills, which I alluded to in my initial statement. Of course, to me, the development of media literacy knowledge, skills, competencies is the main responsibility of the educational system. And thinking of it in terms of a collectivist view of media literacy maybe helps kind of shifting the weight of responsibilities differently. That is, it's kind of well, the deal between the citizen and the educational system would be the educational system supports you in developing your capability, and it's just not your sole responsibility to develop your capability. And in exchange to that, you support the overall health of democracy, and you support the use of your own capability in terms of common good. And so in that framing, again, the responsibility of supporting the development of media literacy is not individual anymore. It's a matter of being entrenched or implemented within the educational system. Unfortunately, and your question was more about the current state of the presence of media literacy in educational systems. I don't have an overall thorough view of this internationally, but my overall impression, and I think it will be shared by most participants, is that in most countries, media literacy is just one of these extra little projects piggybacking on the educational system instead of being really integrated into its very fabric. And that was one of the points I tried to make, that if media literacy is about using different types of symbol systems to participate in society, there's nothing more basic and fundamental to education and learning than literacy in general, or literacies in general, and media literacies in the plural. My impression is that this is not something that has been recognized fully by educational systems today, which still treat media literacy education or information literacy education or digital literacy education as some kind of extra project that that is similar to health literacy or to financial literacy and all these like little niche types of literacies that do not represent the full depth of the importance of what media literacy is.
Yes, thank you, for sure. Julian, when listening to Max and Pierre here, with these kind of common themes of trust, of the need for really having media literacy as part of the fabric and being open to media literacy in terms of some theories of change, could you maybe give us an example or two? Because I think theory of change is something that many people aren't familiar with, and I'm sure that you've been incorporating that in some of your work.
Yeah, so use a theory of change in order to be a bit more granular and a bit more focused on, for example, who do you want your media literacy intervention or your project to reach? Now, in educational terms, we would probably all agree that we want it to reach everybody. We would like every country in the world to have a media literacy educational program, which is resourced, credible, with teacher training, with assessment. All of that would be our blue sky thinking desire. But in terms of the kinds of projects that we tend to get funding for, then you tend to be working with a particular community or a particular group, a particular age group. It might be people who are particularly vulnerable or need more resilience for a particular reason. So what you use a theory of change for is to say, what is the media literacy gap? What's the value and the purpose of the media literacy that you want people to either have or develop? But oftentimes in our work, we find people already have media literacy. It's actually about creating context for them to use their media literacy in different ways or to motivate them in different ways. And very rarely is it simply about skills. It's more about how could you harness your skills, as I said earlier, to develop capabilities for particular kinds of directions. But then that consequences bit is the most important part of the theory of change. And that often needs longitudinal study. So what do you want people to be doing in 5 years' time in the media and digital environment that they're not doing now? How do you want them to be behaving differently as media engaged citizens? And that might be that it's children not sharing social media posts that they now realize are harmful to others or disrespectful of others. It might be that people are thinking twice, being more mindful, maybe reading more laterally when they engage with information that could be conspiracy oriented or lacking trust. These are the things we tend to focus on at the moment because there's so much interest in information disorder and disinformation. But actually, it could be about democracy. It could be about, why does it matter that we have a plural and diverse media that represents all of the groups in our society fairly and accurately, or gives them efficacy to represent themselves? How plural and democratic is our media and information environment? How do we feel about that? And the analogy I would make is, we don't expect young people to learn about climate change and then do nothing about it, right? We expect there to be a conversion of awareness to capability to consequences. We expect young people to understand the threats to our environment, to form the capabilities to act differently, and then to want to act differently so that the planet doesn't heat up beyond all level of safety in the future. Why don't we expect the same around media and digital information awareness? Why do we think that just knowing will make a difference? And just, I know it's a long answer, but very quickly, I would say one of the things we need to be aware of, because we have democracy in the title of this webinar, is that, Gert B. Esther famously said, Democrats are made, not born. And I think we have a problem at the moment if we assume that people care about truth always, that people care about fairness, ethics and justice always, and that somehow if we lift the scales from eyes and make them more aware, they'll necessarily want things to be more democratic. I think we also have to think about how we teach people to understand and then hopefully care for truth, justice and democracy. And media literacy is part of that, but it can't in itself solve that problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and definitely this idea that people automatically have the same values, understand the same values, we just can't afford to go there. It's not happening. And as a result, we really have to help people understand and also come to appreciate the values that democracy represents, because so often there's a real ignorance there. But definitely, yes, thank you. We have questions from the audience, and so we'll go ahead and tackle some of those. Let's see here. Okay. Someone made the comment about libraries. I work at a public library and feel that public libraries can be a valuable media literacy resource for our communities. So do you have ideas about different channels for education? There are libraries and schools that we've talked about. Maybe we can talk about some other channels for reaching audiences, but definitely we know that those two, libraries and schools, are really important centers.
And Tessa, if I can just jump in here, another thing that I think is so important that someone brought up: if you lock yourself into your own bubble, that's what Max said. But it seems like the greatest danger is that people are being algorithmically segregated into bubbles, and they don't recognize that they're in, and they have not exercised agency to create. Any comments?
Mm-hmm. Someone want to jump in on that? That's a good one.
I'll go really quickly because I know I spoke last. I think that's one of the things where, and Max said this as well, we need education and regulation. Sorry, Pierre said that. And, kind of Max alluded to it as well. And I started by saying, I think we also have to be mindful of the limits on our power as media literacy. So what we need to do is educate people so they understand what algorithms are doing, so they have concern about that. But we absolutely need the regulators, the tech giants, the platform capitalists to also do something else as well, because you're absolutely right. While we're trying to help people by teaching them in schools, the rampant forces of kind of platform capitalism are trying to algorithmically commodify and predict and influence every aspect of human behavior. So I think we've got to be mindful of what we can do, but what we also need, governance to do outside of our control.
Yes. Max, do you have some comments on that in terms of
Yes, I perfectly agree with what Michelle told me. It's not only people who themselves choose to go into a bubble, but the system of algorithms force them deeper and deeper into a bubble. So then you only hear the information about the views you yourself want to hear. And here also media literacy could come in, but if you could get people to be at least to some extent interested in listening and hearing to something what is said outside their own bubble, even if we don't agree with it. If some people are very strongly of a certain opinion, I don't think it's at all a bad thing to try to encourage them also to listen to the other side, because at that point your opinion might even be stronger if you, in an intellectual way, have also been aware of the other view. I'll take the opportunity. There was also in the chat, I saw a question of how to reach out to adults. And here I would say that quality journalism is a very crucial role. In Finland, we had the situation that after the Crimea, Finland was targeted by an enormous, intense hostile information campaigns that also targeted our medias. And here we who worked with this question try to inform the media about which information sources are false and which are not. This of course requires that the journalists are interested in telling the truth. But here, especially security authorities and fact checkers can also help quality journalism to make a better job. And finally, if I would also want to comment one thing that Pierre, I believe a few times said, as I understood, Pierre warned for only looking at identifying false news and debunking this. And this I agree very much. I myself try to avoid to use the word disinformation very much, because in very many cases, is a piece of information true or not true, or is it debunked or not true? Not in fact the important thing. The important thing is if you by operations in the information space can make a target group change its behavior, that can be the goal, regardless of anybody believing the information as not. If you by information and disinformation can make a group lose their decision-making ability, you can achieve a hostile goal even if nobody believes the information. So only identifying false news and debunking is not enough. You have to see how it affects decision-making ability and the behavior. It's important to say that an unmade decision is in fact as active decision as a made decision.
Yes. Max, actually a related question came up that I think would be great for you to address. And it's here it says, with a nod to the old idea that the first casualty in war is truth, it seems especially challenging to build media literacy when the misinformation is provided by governments, whether it's Russia justifying invading Ukraine on fighting fascism, or the US justifying war in Iraq on weapons of mass destruction. How do we approach media literacy when the sources of misinformation may have such powerful megaphones? And I think that's such an important question, because we get to the whole notion of institutional trust and the roles of institutions in supporting media literacy. Can you comment on that, please?
I perfectly agree with Bill that this is an extremely challenging situation when also official parties and politicians deliberately tell lies, beginning from President of the United States. How can you in general get a trust in institutions if leaders of institutions themselves lie. But here it goes. But quality journalism can have a role in lifting up lies and giving a more nuanced picture of a situation. But if a country does not have quality journalism, then you're more up shit creek of a problem that Bill is perfectly well describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that from our panelists? The role of institutions in building trust and helping support media literacy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say two things very quickly. One is, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's limited now to those countries and concepts which we've talked. I think it's kind of endemic now. There is an erosion of trust in professional journalism and in civic figureheads who one might previously have expected to operate in a particular way around information. I think that's changed. I think it's changed, and it's not kind of coming back from that. But I think also one of the problems we have is we think in a kind of binary way around it. So often we work with professional journalists on media literacy projects who perfectly understandably think the solution is to get young people in particular to read more professional journalism. But of course, I mentioned Richard Hoggett before. I come from the kind of cultural studies school of media literacy, which would say we should be healthily skeptical about all information. But that presents a huge challenge, right? Because there's an argument that the more media literacy you have, the less trust you have, because the logical conclusion of critical media literacy is less trust. So it's about what we mean by trust, not just trust, blind faith versus crazy levels of skepticism about all information, in which case you end up in this kind of relativist dystopia, which I think there are elements of that, coming from where I am literally right now.
Excellent. Yes. Pierre, what about education? Do you think that there's a movement toward embracing media literacy in the education systems, given the different struggles that we have, on empowerment versus protectionism and some of those kinds of issues? What do you really see as the challenge for education systems in adopting this? I know that's a huge question, but still,
Yep.
I think to maybe identify some steps that people can take with education that might point us in the direction that we'd like to see.
Yeah, so my overall impression is that the interest in media literacy or in the integration of media literacy in education and educational system is only marginal in many countries. Now, if I may, I'd like to make the connection between your question and some of the things that were said initially about this idea of algorithms and filter bubbles. And the connection, I think, is this idea that we should not only teach skills, knowledge, or competencies, but also teach while being mindful about teaching students to care about media diversity, to care about not being exposed to always the same media, to care about hearing the other side of the argument in a context of political polarization. And I want just very quickly to point to an anecdote. I was sitting on the jury of a PhD thesis recently, where the PhD candidate addressed questions of media literacy through technological design. So how can technology foster media literacy? And one of the things he did was develop a news curation platform that allowed people to see how the algorithm worked and to fiddle with how it worked. That is to change or to fine tune what the algorithm was fed, how it worked and how it presented its results. So they had a whole array of tools to fiddle with, to try to get exposed to more diverse news as it was. And one of the main results of the thesis is that most users that were exposed to this platform didn't really care. They didn't really use all these functionalities. And so coming back to one of the arguments that Julian made earlier, it's not just a matter of teaching skills, it's a matter of teaching to care about media diversity and so on. And so it's It's just not about the critical understanding of the media landscape. It's also about caring why it's important that there is a diversity in the media landscape.
Mhm. Well, thank you for that. And we've come to the end of our time. So I'm sorry to say goodbye. It's been a fascinating discussion, and really thank you for sharing your insights and perspectives. We will have one final webinar on Friday. It will be on NATO delegations and media literacy in governments, leading the way for more resilient global citizens. So we'll take a deep look at how the government institutions themselves can support media literacy. So I thank again all of you. I thank the participants for coming and sharing with us as well. And we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you on Friday. Take care now.